Well, do you know what?
In the
I've
Wonder
actually
Box.
brought it with me
Oh,
because I
great.
found it as on the way out.
Oh, that's nice.
And it is this
Ooh.
mini London A to Z.
Okay.
Now, for your younger viewers and listeners, they may not be familiar with these.
Sure.
But when I first moved to London in very late 90s, how else did you know where you were going? I was, born and raised in Bristol, didn't know the city. The only way to get around was the mini London A to Z. That would slip conveniently into my cagoule. And people would often, I remember people would I'd get this out and people would laugh, they'd mock. And yet very quickly they'd be reliant on me to get us to the party or the venue or wherever we were going. And so the reason I want to put it in is because I have a lot of affection for this, because I feel like it was sort of a trusty companion for the first, 5-10 years of being in London. And I used it for everything from, finding someone's house that there was a house party, or going to gigs when I first started gigging, and you'd sort of, you remember you'd have to sort of call up a phone number in Time Out magazine, right? And, if you were lucky, they'd let you do a slot in 3 weeks. And then, I'd make a note, I'd write a Post-it note with the address and I'd put it in here. And otherwise, I would never have got there.
Yeah.
And, or sometimes, going to, music gigs or whatever it was. And, as long as I was sort of within, central London, I was okay. If I went too far out, I was done for. Then it was like the Wild West, and I was just, I was struggling. Because I was never very good at following directions. They'd give you directions on the phone, and they may as well have spoke Polish. I could not write them down fast enough. I couldn't absorb them.
And completely, it's exactly that. It's if you pull over. But this is before the days of like phones and Google.
Yeah, that's right.
And you go, excuse me, do you know where the Giggle Factory is?
Of course.
And it's like the back room of some pub in Staines.
Yeah, they got no idea.
And the guy, or they know where it is and they explain it to you.
Yeah.
And you're like, and then 10 seconds later, it's disappeared.
Well, I've talked about this on something once before, but the only thing worse than asking for directions is being asked for them.
Yes.
And one time I was in London and a man asked me for directions and I panicked and I just put on a sort of bad foreign accent.
Wow.
I just preferred to pretend I don't, how you say, not from this area. And he said, are you Stephen Merchant? And I went,
wow.
no.
Okay.
Just had to double down on it and just walked
that.
away. But I genuinely was anxious. I didn't want to even embark on trying to explain. I can't really judge yards, miles, meters. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I'd have sent him on a wild goose chase.
Yeah, no, I know. But when you definitely know, that's exciting. It doesn't happen.
If it's very local, if it's very easy to find.
But for example, where you live, if someone said, "Where's London Zoo?"
Yes,
that's because I've had that.
I'll say I'll walk you there.
Yeah, and it's really exciting, and with real certainty. How do I get to Camden Tube?
Yes,
I've got this.
Yes, but it has to be very much in my
it's got to be
territory.
in Camden.
It really has to be very close.
Do you know where Whole Foods is? Yes, I do.
Yeah, but again, even then, trying to explain it,
really?
Remembering the names of streets.
Oh, I don't do that.
Very difficult.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm very much a shop guy. I would never kind of say.
Or landmarks, yes, I can.
I would even go shops over a landmark.
Would you? Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about it. Like if I had to explain how to get to the zoo from Camden, you go up that road, past Foxton's.
Yes.
And then you carry over the traffic lights and just head straight and you'll be there.
Yeah, it already starts to sound woolly. Even as you say it, and I know where you mean.
I know.
But I think what it was, I don't know if you had something similar when you first moved to London. Maybe you came up in a blaze of glory and you were chauffeur driven. But there was something there was an excitement to it. There was an excitement about finding a new place or I'd use this and I'd get somewhere and then we'd go to a house party in the middle of nowhere and then I'd take the last bus back and I'd invariably fall asleep on the bus and I'd overshoot.
Yeah.
I remember I was living in Oval. Yeah. And the bus would somehow end up in the middle of nowhere, and then I didn't know how to get home. And the idea of paying for a taxi just seemed insane.
Yeah.
Like the cost was preposterous. Who could afford to take a cab? To flag a cab down, you'd have to be on the way to A&E with a severed limb. You know what I mean? And then the biggest thing when I started getting a little bit of money was starting to use black cabs. And that was game changing. That was absolute. And the A to Z went out the window. I'm like, take me wherever I need to go, my man.
And so, why did you move to London? What was was that to do stand up? What was
Well, I got a job at a radio station, XFM, which is where I met Ricky Gervais. So I moved up for that. But
what was the job?
It was, well, he was the head of speech and I was the assistant head of speech. And he had been hired essentially to sort of contribute, stuff to the DJs, material for the DJs to chat about. And then he immediately said he needed an assistant. And so I somehow got a job. I answered an ad in the NME.
Wow.
I think that was it. Or I'd sent a resume. Anyway, yeah, he called me up and we hit it off. So, yes. And so...
and how old are you at this stage?
I'm in my early 20s.
And you done...
But I was doing stand-up in the evenings, yeah.
You're doing stand-up, and were you doing radio in Bristol?
I'd done some sort of, those kind of, short-lived, temporary, 1 month radio station things. And I'd done a lot of radio at university. But no, this was my first professional gig.
So was the aim to kind of...
My aim was that if you become a
somewhere?
DJ... I figured that's only a couple of hours a day, right? You're doing the 4 till 6 slot, which would free you up to do a lot of other things, right? Stand up or fishing, whatever it might be. So that was my plan.
Yeah.
But it kind of got derailed because we ended up doing The Office, and I never needed to do the DJ.
Was that
DJ
like?
slot.
Was there sort of an instant moment when you were hanging out where you were like, something's clicked here? There's a real sense of humour.
Yes, exactly. There was a shared sensibility, shared sense of humour. I remember the station launched the day after Princess Diana died. So what was hoping to be a sort of alternative music kind of kick the doors off radio and say, here we are, couldn't because of the...
It was all classical music that day.
It was very earnest and there was lots of songs you couldn't play.
Yeah.
Airbag by Radiohead, other things that were banned.
Yeah.
And it was very kind of somber.
It's a big day for Elton John.
It was a big day for Elton John. And so the station, I think, slightly struggled to get going after that. And eventually, I think about a week in, we had an email from the boss that said to Ricky and I, what am I paying you cunts for?
Okay, yeah.
And we thought, hey,
yeah,
so we actually
what does he mean?
What does he mean by that? Is there a subtext to this? And so we went on the air and we did a sort of jokey bit called What Londoners Need to Know, which was just nonsense, kind of a sort of irreverent, us mucking around. And we got an follow-up email, said that was the funniest thing I've ever heard. And he would swing from both those extremes, the boss.
Yeah.
But eventually I got a job, a training job at the BBC, or a traineeship. So I kind of jumped ship and I joined the BBC. And this, again, the A to Z became very, I remember I was working on a program called Comedy Nation. It was the lowest budget comedy sketch show the BBC had ever done at that point.
Yeah.
Lots of amazing talent that was not at the time well known. Sacha Baron Cohen, I think, did something, Mitchell and Webb. All sorts of people. I was working behind the scenes, and they sent me on. I was location scout for 1 week. I was costume designer the next.
Okay, yeah.
And having only just moved on, they sent me out to find a location. They said, "Go and check
they
this
knew
location."
you had an A to Z.
They knew I had an A to Z and a driving license. And I set off, and I remember I set off, and about 40 minutes later, I came back. I went, I can't find it. Like I was just driving, and I was trying to follow the A to Z, and I just couldn't get to where, like a sort of anxiety dream where you just can't get where you need to go. It was that, and I had to come back and go, I can't.
I also imagine that poor tiny map on your huge body,
exactly,
and you driving and just trying to kind of make it balance,
constantly pulling over.
Yeah.
Glasses pushed up to try and get. Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmare. It was again before before GPS was kind of.
Didn't that revolutionise stand-up?
Unbelievable.
Like that. I remember the first time getting a sat nav, and just this robot helper that meant a 2-hour journey was going to be 2 hours.
That's right.
Just be able to get to the gig, and it could tell you where speed cameras were.
Yes. Oh, of course.
Mind-blowing.
Game changing.
Yeah.
So what about you then? When you first moved up here, you already had GPS and stuff, did you? You never needed to depend on one of these bad boys.
At that stage, so I moved to London in 2002, and I was living in New Cross, and then I briefly lived at Crystal Palace, and at a friend's house.
Yeah.
I was kind of there for a year, and it kind of churned me out because I couldn't make my rent.
Right.
So then I kind of went back to Bristol, still doing stand-up, and just because I could pay rent there, it was cheaper.
Yeah.
So I kind of then came back to London when I was a little bit sort of on firmer ground.
Sure, right.
Moved to kind of, where did I live then? I lived in Highgate and then Maida Vale.
Yeah.
So I never really did the the kind of classic struggle. I just couldn't afford it. Is the truth,
Sure,
because I was
yeah.
just living off of stand-up money and ringing up Daryl Martin and going, seriously, I need my money because my rent's due at the
Yeah,
end
of
the
course,
month.
yeah. Well, that was the thing. I had the radio job, and then I had that BBC training job, and so I always had at least a small but steady wage.
Yes.
And so I was able to sort of stay here and go off and do gigs for free.
Do you know,
and
me and Al, there was a thing, there's my friend Al Pitcher, there was a radio show on BBC One that was doing a comedy show, and they were kind of asking, you know, lots of young comics to come in and have meetings. And they had me and Al in, and the question I asked was, will we get paid monthly? Like, it's such an
Yes,
awful,
yes.
but that was a real indication of why I was there. I was
Yeah.
basically saying, look, I need you lot to subsidise my stand-up career.
Yeah,
Is
right.
that something you're willing to do?
Of course.
To which they were like, no,
Yeah.
no, of course not.
Absolutely. Well, I often think though about the fact that the people that manufactured things like the A to Zs, and there were the larger driving maps, weren't there, that you could have, you know,
that was
the
the one
whole
I had.
country,
Yeah.
the big map. And I feel like presumably those are sort of, they probably still make them, but the bottom obviously fell out of that market. And I just think about those, like I always think about the people behind Filofax.
Yes.
They must have thought, we are crushing this.
Yeah.
There's no way we're ever going to get our comeuppance, as it were, in the Simpsons style.
Yeah, but the swagger of, like, you know, the owners of Blockbuster,
That's it.
Kodak,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Pages.
Oh,
Like,
I mean, I remember I still have very mixed feelings with Blockbuster, because I went up there once, living in Swiss Cottage, London, and I went in the video shop. I was a regular in there, a big movie buff, and I rented, I think it was Pulp Fiction. But when I got home, I opened the box, it was Miss Congeniality 2.
that's a big...
Now,
And hang on, so did you know it was Miss Congeniality, or were you like, Pulp Fiction's not what I thought
well,
it was?
if you remember, you would take the case which had the sort of the official kind of poster of the movie, and you take that up, and they would substitute that with a blank case that just, you know, that had the video or the DVD in it. So I was so bummed, because it was like a 25-minute walk. So I walked all the way back, and I explained the problem, and the guy behind the counter went, "What's happened?" I said, "Well, yeah, I rented Pulp Fiction, and you've given me Miss Congeniality 2. He went, "Impossible." I said, "What?" He goes, "Our system is flawless." I said, "So your thinking is that I wanted to see Miss Congeniality 2. I've gone home, I've watched it, I've loved it, I've come back, and now I'm trying to get my £2.50 back in some kind of scam." And he went, "I'm not accusing you of that, sir, because," and in speech marks, "the customer is always right." Wow. And it was a level of sarcasm and condescension, the likes of which I've never known. I'm still scarred by it.
Yeah.
And I remember writing a letter to Blockbuster saying, and I think it was just around the time that we were doing The Office, and so it hadn't necessarily been out, or maybe there'd been one series, but I sort of wrote a really pompous letter like, "I am in the arts, sir, and I watch many DVDs, and you're, you know, blah, blah, blah." And they sort of wrote back a kind of, "Yeah, you can have one free film." And I'm like, yes, crushed it. And anyway, so when Blockbuster went down, I felt my revenge was complete.
Have you seen Pulp Fiction?
I have seen Pulp
Thank
Fiction,
goodness.
thank you. Yeah.
Have you seen Miss Congeniality 2?
I have never seen Miss Congeniality 2, or indeed Congeniality 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a...
It's the hard-hitting questions on this podcast.
Do you have a guilty